I am Dr. Anurag Agrawal, professor in English, and today, on the request of many students all over India, I am here in front of you for this class, which I am giving to all over India students from Kashmir to Trivandrum who are listening me here live. And we are going to start the medieval period. Starts from 1066 to 1485. स्टूडेंट्स हमेशा ध्यान रखिए कि जब भी हम हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंग्लिश लिटरेचर पढ़ते हैं तो जहां से शुरू करते हैं वो ये है जगह दैट इज 1066 एंड इन 1066 at the battle of Hastings, Harold, who was the Saxon king of England, was defeated by whom? He was defeated by William the Conqueror, William the Duke of Normandy, who invaded England to support his claim that he had been promised the English throne. And he was a very efficient, ruthless soldier with a number of experienced, you can say, soldiers of fortune among his followers. William was soon able to conquer the whole country. पहले उसने थोड़े थोड़े पार्ट्स को कॉन्कर किया, बट एक समय ऐसा आया जब पूरे कंट्री को उसने कॉन्कर कर लिया. And who was he? He was William the Conqueror, William of Normandy. अब आता है और भी जरूरी बात, that the Normans, ये नाम कहां से डिराइव हुआ है? This name has been derived from Northmen, Northman, Northman. And these Northmen or Northmen were in large part descended from where? From the Vikings, who had seized and then remained in the northwestern France, which became known as Normandy. And after more than 100 years in France, the Normans had adopted many French customs and had their own variation of French language that is called Norman French. Who were these people? These people were curious people. They were superb soldiers. They were excellent administrators and lawyers, borrowers, adapters, but lacking the original ideas. Even the architecture, even the ambitious building in stone that they introduced into England originated in North Italy. And it used to be assumed that their Norman conquerors civilized these beaten Saxons. But in some respects, notably in their more democratic system of government and in their crafts and designs, these Saxons were further advanced than the Normans. And after the conquest, because of the highly centralized and stable Norman government, England became a formidable power. Also a country much closer to the mainstream of European civilization. Finally, and what is more important, students, here, that the Norman and the Saxon elements were soon fused into a national English character, neither predominantly Norman nor Saxon, but a subtle blend of both. Clear, students? Roughly we can say from the 11th to the 15th century, Western Europe achieved a complete civilization and complete culture of its own. Although our present day civilization has grown directly out of the medieval civilization, life in the Middle Ages was far different from that we know today. If we begin with the medieval society had a secure foundation and framework of religion. Everyone was a son of a daughter of the church and on his way of heaven or hell. Fierce and powerful rulers could sometimes be seen walking barefoot to do the penance for their sins. Everybody from the highest to the lowest was conscious of being on trial here on earth. Of course, people misbehaved then as people did before and have done since. But then they knew that they were misbehaving and that they were miserable sinners. So this world to them was like a transparency through which gleamed the fire of hell, or the that is the bright blue of heaven. And who was responsible, students? The church was responsible for the spiritual life of all the Christendom, linking together all the kingdoms, all the dukedoms, all the principalities, and the free cities of the Western and the Central Europe. In Latin, it had a language common to all educated people. Its chief scholars and philosophers, like the famous Thomas Aquinas, एक नाम है बड़ा famous, Thomas Aquinas, Aquinas. He was a chief scholar and a philosopher. He moved freely from the university to university and from country to country. Its abbeys, its monasteries were not only the chief centers of learning and the arts in the period before the establishment of the universities of Oxford and Cambridge in the 13th century. The greatest single achievement of the Middle Age was the idea of the Commonwealth of Christendom, a kind of a spiritual and cultural empire, uniting men of different nationalities, but speaking many different languages and enjoying many different regional ways of life. In our own day, science and invention have given us things that would have seemed to the medieval mind like so many strange miracles and the marvels of the sorcerers. However, we have not yet achieved our own equivalent of the Commonwealth of Christendom, a whole society, a civilization, a common culture, united under God. So yes, Geoffrey Chaucer, the first father figure, the first great figure, father of English poetry and English literature, was no other than but Geoffrey Chaucer, 1340 to 1400. Although we can say that he was basically Chaucer is so far removed from us, and his manner and language, especially in the original Middle English, we can easily underestimate this astonishing man. He was not only a great poet, but a fine storyteller, but also the first of the humorists. And this man, whether moving as a diplomat from one royal court to another royal court, and his greatest work belongs not to romance, but to poetic and the humorous realism. With Chaucer, the writer is no longer anonymous, but emerges in all its variety, in all its subtlety of an impressive individual. From the common people of early England and Scotland came ballads, songs not written down but recited and sung in innumerable alehouses and at thousands of firesides, जो आग लगा करके लोग बैठ जाते हैं गांव में और म्यूजिक गाते हैं, गाना गाते हैं, फोक गाते हैं. So this folk poetry flourished in the 14th and the 15th centuries, but it was not until the middle of the 18th century that it was carefully collected and published. The popular drama reached a tremendous height in the Elizabethan age, लेकिन उसका origin कहां था? In the Middle Ages. During the frequent holiday times, celebrating the religious festivals, the trade guilds entertained the crowd with the miracle plays, with the rough dramatizations of biblical stories which are performed on the large platforms, in the marketplaces, in the yards, in the churches. As a rule, the wicked characters in these plays, including the devil himself, were played as comic characters. thereby creating a tradition of popular comedy, and that Elizabethan dramatists followed. It was all very rough, very ready, but in these humble performances, there was already stirring the glorious theatre of Shakespeare कि वो आने वाला है. And towards the end of the Middle Ages in England, during the dark, troubled times of the 15th century, the miracle plays gave place to the morality plays. And these plays, although presented in the same way as the miracle plays, tended to be elaborate, sophisticated dramatic allegories in which characters representing various virtues and vices confronted each other. The most famous of the morality play, and one is still often performed in many countries, is or was Everyman. Although this play was not English in origin, a thoroughly English adaptation of it soon became very popular. Even during the present century, this play has been performed in the English theatre fairly often. English literature owes a great deal to the Middle Ages. In this period, a great many literary forms had their origin. The Gothic, the Middle Ages, best represented now by their glorious cathedrals, have always been haunted the imagination of more than poetic writers, English writers, with the brilliant and colored visions of the knights, the squires, the minstrels, the pages, the pilgrims, the crusaders, the monks, the scholars, and the fine ladies. You all can see these details in the Chaucer's poetry. But the real secret of this appeal of this period at its best does not lie in the romantic picturesqueness, enchanting though it may be. It comes from the fact that during these years, Western man, that restless, inventive, aggressive, troubled creatures, achieved an elaborate, organized way of life completely contained within a common religion. So the first which I want to teach you here is the romance of the rose, जिसको कि हम कहते हैं रोमांट ऑफ द रोज भी कहते हैं, which is supposed to be the earliest work of Chaucer, and it is a fragmentary translation. Romance of the Rose is a fragmentary translation of the French romantic poem Le Roman de la Rose. Original क्या था? Le Roman de la Rose by two authors, and these two authors are गुलियाम डी लॉरिस एंड जीन डी म्योंग. ये सब नेट एसेंट्रिक है, आपने एग्जाम में पेपर से देख लीजिएगा. ये जितनी भी चीजें मैं अब आपको बताने जा रहा हूं सब आपको पेपर्स में छपी मिलेंगी पिछले 10 साल में, कि व्हाट इज द ओरिजिनल ले रोमन डी ला रोज, हु आर द राइटर्स ऑफ दिस ओरिजिनल, गुलियाम डी लॉरिस एंड जीन डी म्योन, एंड यहीं से उठा करके चौसर ने लिखा है अपना रोमांस ऑफ द रोज. We do not know whether Chaucer has translated the poem, but it must have been quite early in the life. And in one of his later poems, जिसका नाम है Legend of Good Women, Chaucer refers to his authorship of his translation of the French poem. And the French poem is in 3 parts, partly written by Guillaume and partly by Myong. And the theme is courtly love, which is treated idealistically by the former poet and realistically and satiristically by the latter poet, that is Myon. And it was a very popular poem of the 13th century. The influence of the poem, however, on Chaucer's subsequent poetry was immense. Chaucer must have taken very great interest in the French original. Literally, hundreds of lines from the Roman appear in his own poetry, either in the close translation or in the paraphrase. There is another poem, Complaint Unto Pity. This is a poem by Chaucer on unrequited love, a common practice among the medieval poets. And this was an early poem by Chaucer. It has been surmised that the period of composition might be between 1367 or 1370. And the theme of unfulfilled love, which the poem elaborates, might not have been personal, for such a theme was in Chaucer's time a part of the poetic convention only. द नेक्स्ट इज द बुक ऑफ द डचेस, जो आपने शायद खुद भी पढ़ा हो. And this book of the Duchess was an elegy composed on the death of Blanche. Who was Blanche? The Duchess of Lancaster and the first wife of John of Gaunt. और John of Gaunt कौन था? He was Chaucer's patron. She died late in 1369 and the poem was composed within a few months after her death. Chaucer borrowed the facts from a number of sources and the notable of which, कौन कौन से सोर्सेज मेन थे? ये क्वेश्चन आता है कि जो बुक ऑफ डचेस लिखा है चौसर ने, वो किन की हेल्प से लिखा होगा? तो उसमें जो नोटेबल सोर्सेज हैं वो हैं ओविड की मेटामॉर्फोसिस, ओविड्स मेटामॉर्फोसिस. द टेक्निक ऑफ द पोएम इज मॉडल्ड ऑन द कन्वेंशनल कोर्टली पोएट ऑफ फ्रांस ऑफ द सेम पीरियड एंड इट प्रूव्स द स्ट्रॉन्ग इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ फ्रेंच रोमांटिक पोएट्री ऑफ चौसर. And there are also references to this poem in the two other poems of Chaucer, that is the Legend of Good Women and the Man of Law's Tale in the Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales जब आप पढ़ेंगे ना तो उसमें बहुत सारी टेल्स हैं, तो उसमें एक टेल का नाम है मैन ऑफ लॉस टेल. And this poem, the Book of the Duchess, is written in the free octosyllabic verse. Then he has written a poem, The Complaint of Mars. The Complaint ऐसे कर सकते हैं, of M-A-R-S. This was a poem, again allegorical, which he might have written somewhere around 1374. And this poem, the theme of this poem centers around some mythological story of a love between Mars क्या है? The god of war, and Venus, the goddess of love, which is actually a very highly conventional theme of that period. So the next poem is The Parliament of Fowls, very important poem. The Parliament of Fowls. Parliament of Fowls, students, it is a long poem in which the poet very subtly wrote on the theme of love through an imaginary account of the parliament of birds. Chaucer used once again the rhyme-rhyme stanza and freely used his source materials consisting of diverse literary works of the past. It is a great poem. इसी को कहते हैं, एक बार आया था क्वेश्चन कि what is the name of that poem which is a beast fable? So the answer was The Parliament of Fowls.